The American president, Donald Trump, apparently did apologize to the Iranian delegation, which allowed the negotiations to continue. And as the main apology, the United States of America completely lifted the sanctions on Iranian oil. From now on, Iran can sell its oil worldwide without any restrictions or sanctions for the first time in many years. Moreover, Iran is now allowed to sell its oil even to the United States of America for US dollars, and those dollars can be received by Iranians whom Americans previously called terrorists. And just to be clear, the parties haven't even agreed on anything yet, meaning there is no agreement at all. For example, US Vice President J.D. Vance announced that Iran has agreed to invite inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency to the country so that they can, conduct an inspection of enriched uranium stockpiles. But immediately after that, the spokesperson for Iran's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Esmail Baghai, just smiled and stated that Iran has not taken on any new or additional obligations regarding cooperation with the IAEA. After that, Donald Trump appeared in public and said, "No, you don't understand anything. Iran has actually agreed that inspectors will come to Iran." In Tehran, they reiterated that no, we have not taken on such an obligation. And Baghai also added that the issue of the nuclear program is number 13 out of 14 points in the Memorandum of Understanding, and in order to get to it, the US must fulfill the previous 12 points. And these are stopping the war in Lebanon, lifting the blockade, removing absolutely all sanctions and export restrictions, and unfreezing Iranian assets. And Baghai says only after that we might discuss the nuclear program. But there is also good news. The Strait of Hormuz is finally open, and Iran has agreed to it. They have agreed on a mechanism for how it will be opened and how it will operate. In short, let's discuss in this episode the latest news about how Donald Trump is making a big show of defeating Iran. My name is Alexei Pecci. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and leave any comment below this video. So, the negotiations in Switzerland between the US and Iranian delegations ended with more concessions from Donald Trump. First, let me share some interesting sociological data. According to a sociological survey published in the Times of Israel, 92% of Israelis believe that Iran has won in the current war. The survey showed that even among voters who support the right-wing bloc led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, 93.1% believe that Iran has won. Although it would seem that these are the right-wingers who would turn a blind eye and say, no, we are the ones who won. Overall, 86% of all Israelis have a negative attitude toward the results of the hostilities and the agreement reached between the US and Iran without Israel's participation. And 88% of Israelis believe that the country did not achieve the goals for which it started the war against Iran in the first place. But Donald Trump insists that Iran has in fact capitulated. And in the spirit of a victor, the United States of America has finally lifted sanctions on Iran. A representative of the Iranian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Esmail Baghai, stated that Iran and the US agreed to establish a special mechanism for the safe passage of ships through the Hormuz Strait during the first round of negotiations in Switzerland. Also, according to him, issues were raised regarding granting permission for the sale of Iranian oil and petroleum products, as well as unfreezing Iran's frozen assets. The head of Iran's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Abbas Araghchi, clarified that the decisions on oil exports and the unfreezing of assets were fully agreed upon. At the same time, Baghai confirmed that the Iranian side refused to continue negotiations due to threats from US President Donald Trump. I talked about these threats in detail in the previous episode on this YouTube channel. So, if you missed it, I highly recommend you go back to my YouTube channel now and watch the previous episode, where Trump called and directly threatened members of the Iranian delegation, saying that if you don't make concessions to me, you won't return to your country alive. To this, Iran said that they would not be intimidated and demanded an apology from Trump to continue the negotiations. Well, as we can see, the negotiations continued. At the same time, technical teams from the US and Iranian delegations continue their work in Switzerland. It is known that they will definitely be working there until the end of the week. Later, Pakistan and Qatar, who are acting as mediators in the negotiations between the US and Iran, released a joint statement following the first meeting. It states that the negotiations were held in a positive and constructive manner, which allowed the parties to achieve encouraging progress. In particular, Tehran and Washington agreed to establish a high-level committee that will oversee the negotiation process, while working groups will address Iran's nuclear program, sanctions, monitoring the implementation of agreements, and dispute resolution. Separately, Tehran and Washington agreed on a mechanism to monitor the cessation of hostilities between Israel and the Hezbollah group in Lebanon. This point is actually a huge slap in the face to Israel, delivered by Donald Trump himself. Listen again, Tehran and Washington agreed between themselves that they would create some kind of group to make sure Israel and Hezbollah don't fight each other. What do you even call that? The question of sovereignty isn't even raised anymore. But as they say, these are just words, while in reality Iran has achieved what it couldn't accomplish through war. The United States of America has lifted sanctions on Iranian oil completely. The Office of Foreign Assets Control of the United States Department of the Treasury has issued a license valid until August 21st, allowing the trade of oil and petroleum products produced in Iran. The permit has been issued for 60 days, during which Tehran and Washington are expected to reach a comprehensive agreement on the disputed issues described in the memorandum they signed last week. As you can imagine, 60 days may pass, and no agreement will be signed, but during these 60 days, Iran can openly trade its oil. This hasn't happened for many years. But the United States Department of the Treasury didn't just allow the export of products from the Iranian oil industry and their purchase by third countries. The United States, as Glazer points out. It can even be supplied to the United States of America, and payment can be made in US dollars, including those held by Americans. Dollars! Including to sanctioned Iranian individuals and organizations. So, if you break it down, this is a very broad lifting of sanctions, not just on oil sales, but, for example, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which Americans used to call terrorists, can now receive dollars for selling oil. Well, at least 60 days. But there's also an important point for Ukraine in this lifting of sanctions. Well, at least there's some upside. Iran was allowed to sell oil to the whole world except for North Korea, Cuba, and the occupied regions of Ukraine, including Crimea. But the point is that during the negotiations, the sanctions were lifted not just from Iran, but from those Iranian officials and organizations that the Americans had previously called terrorists. And what did the United States of America get in return? Well, as usually happens in negotiations, one concession from one side and another concession from the other side. On Monday, US Vice President J.D. Vance announced that Iran had agreed to invite inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency to the country to monitor its enriched uranium stockpiles. Supposedly, the US wanted the first round of negotiations to end with Iran inviting UN inspectors to visit its key nuclear facilities, which had been bombed by the US and Israel, and so that these inspectors could see for themselves what is really happening there, and whether all that enriched uranium is really buried, and overall what condition these nuclear facilities are in. And supposedly, according to Vance, the US has achieved exactly that. He says, that's what we wanted, that's exactly what we achieved, and in return the sanctions on Iran were lifted. Let me remind you that the last visit of such IAEA inspectors took place before the war in June 2025. And now J.D. Vance stated that coordination between Iran, the US, and the IAEA regarding such a visit will take place this week. This already, raised some doubts about such a decision. Because if they've already agreed, then maybe they could also announce when. Vance says, well, we can't announce it yet, we're still negotiating when these inspectors can get to Iran. And, that's it. And actually Vance was dodging the question, not for nothing. The thing is, right after this statement by J.D. Vance, the Iranians smiled and said, wait, something's not right here. And the spokesperson for the Iranian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Esmail Baghai, stated that Actually, following the negotiations in Switzerland, Iran did not take on any additional obligations regarding cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency. I'll quote him further. Iran's cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency will continue according to the current procedures and in accordance with the decisions of the Islamic Consultative Assembly and the National Security Council. Let me remind you, these bodies decided in 2025 to stop cooperating with the IAEA. Bagai also added that discussions on cooperation in the nuclear field are only possible under the terms of Point 13 of the Memorandum of Understanding between the US and Iran. That is, after resolving the issues of a full ceasefire, lifting the blockade and export restrictions, as well as unfreezing Iranian assets. If you didn't get it, I'll explain differently. Iran is telling the Americans directly, look, the Memorandum of Understanding consists of 14 points. The issue of the nuclear program and enriched uranium is number 13 in this memorandum. So, to get to it, you first need to resolve the previous 12 issues. And only after that can you move on to discussing the nuclear program. Not resolving it, just discussing it. And those first 12 points cover everything. That's ending the war in Lebanon. That's the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Lebanon. That's lifting absolutely all sanctions. That's lifting the blockade. That's unfreezing Iranian assets. That's creating a $300 billion investment fund for Iran's reconstruction. And so on and so on and so on. And only then, that is, Iran will get everything. So he'll get everything he demanded, and only then does he agree to discuss the nuclear program. And Bagai says, listen, until that moment, don't even try. And against the backdrop of contradictory statements about allowing the IAEA access to Iran's nuclear facilities, Donald Trump insisted that Tehran would in fact agree. He hasn't agreed yet, but someday he will agree to large-scale inspections. Quote, everyone fully realizes that Iran will sooner or later agree to large-scale inspections and armaments in order to ensure nuclear integrity in the long term. So, as you understand, Trump admitted that yes, during the first round of negotiations, Iran didn't agree to anything. He says, well, they will definitely agree. Don't get me wrong, we're not fools. Yes, we lifted the sanctions from them. We allowed them to make money. But we are sure that Iran will eventually agree to let IAEA inspectors come to their nuclear facilities. Well, I just want to answer Trump with his own words. The only thing everyone fully realizes is that Iran got the sanctions lifted and the United States of America got nothing. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, like the episode, and don't forget to hit the bell. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so financially. You can donate using the links and details in the description of this video. That's all for now. Take care. Bye everyone.